today we're kind of focusing on like the future of arts administration, where the way the trends are changing and what's happening, and how we as arts administrators can kind of deal with that and what we expect to see. So all the panelists on our panel, thank you so much for joining us, have in some way, indirectly or directly, have to work in audience development. So this can affect like a multitude of things inside the organization, such as like strategic planning. What are some of the most significant changes or issues that in audience engagement that have affected your organizations? We can go down the line. Vasso?
Well, one of the challenges of Cooper-Hewitt at the moment is that we're undergoing a massive renovation project in Cooper-Hewitt's history, where the museum itself is currently closed. So for the past 3 years, we've been thinking about how do we maintain our audience through this time when we don't have a physical museum and we don't have a physical space. And we really took the project to heart and thought, you know, what a wonderful opportunity this is. You know, it's given us the chance to spread our wings, both digitally as well as physically, and look at new opportunities and new audiences. We decided to open an education center up in the Harlem area of the city because we no longer had an education space with the museum closing. And we've reached a whole new community on that front. Our exhibitions have been traveling around the country and around the world. And in the digital world, we've launched an Object of the Day series, which allows visitors to learn about our collection without coming to see the museum and without seeing the objects in person. We've also moved forward in technology fronts with digitizing our entire collection, or in the process of digitizing our entire collection and making it searchable by various aspects like color and things that you don't normally expect to find in a museum setting.
Eugenia?
So I think, I think it's always a question of how to better engage your digital audience, whether it's through social channels or whether it's through other digital properties. And for us right now at Jazz at Lincoln Center, we're really focused on expanding, broadening, diversifying our digital audiences around the world. And we're doing this with this whole content strategy around producing original video content, VOD for our concerts, and offering free live webcasts. So, I mean, for us, but the question is, you worry about cannibalization, right? Especially around ticket sales and everything. But the way we see it is that we are also jazz advocates, and as that other pillar, we are focused on reaching audiences around the world who may not be able to come to New York City and see one of our live shows. So that's something that we are really invested in and focused on doing at this moment.
So as a fundraiser working with foundations and the government, engagement looks a little different from my perspective. We're really focused, or I'm primarily focused on engaging funders, some of whom want to be engaged very directly, some of who want to have a little bit more of a hands-off approach, in part maybe to retain their objectivity, maybe not. You know, it's fundraising, it's not really that objective. So that's my basic hat, but within that, the museum, of course, overall is completely engaged with how we work with different audiences, and as a fundraiser, I have to be able to speak to the different tiers of audiences we do work with, particularly through our education programs, and that's one area I work largely with. So with the move of the Whitney from the Upper East Side to the west side of Lower Manhattan, we're definitely taking a moment to step back, strategize about how to authentically engage that audience, which is a little different from the Upper East Side New Yorkers who have been our neighbors for so long. And we've been working on community outreach and engagement very intensively for the last 2 years, really in preparation for that move. And it's been fascinating to watch how working with community organizations in particular has really changed how the entire education department, and from the education department, the curatorial and administrative sides of the museum as well, think about what we've been doing.
So throughout the Nuyorican Poets Cafe's 40-year history, one of our strengths, but also one of our challenges, has been the incredible diversity of the art forms that we traffic in and the diversity of our artists and audiences. I say a strength because so much of the cafe's identity is built around that diversity. But when it comes to reaching spectators, reaching audiences, reaching artists, even reaching funders, as well as communicating who we are and what we are about, it can be challenging for an organization that works across multiple art forms, across multiple genres, and with a wide variety of artists and audiences. It's interesting to note, when I was interviewing for the job that I'm in now, which I've had for about 6 years, I mentioned to our board an article I had just seen that mentioned the Nuyorican Poets Cafe, as a New York Times article that mentioned the cafe and compared it to other arts organizations, and no one on the board had seen it. And when I asked around a little bit more, none of the regular artists, none of the staff, no one at the organization actually read the New York Times on an ongoing basis, which brings up an interesting challenge that I think is true for a lot of arts organizations. The more diversified our news sources and cultural sources are, the harder it is to reach any one group with any one promotional strategy. We found that a lot of our spectators, especially those who prefer, let's say, slam poetry over theater, get their news from blogs, from sometimes smaller periodicals. In any case, we found that social media is our strongest asset when it comes to reaching a broad, diverse, and widening population. And in the 6 years that I've been there, we've almost entirely abandoned print advertising or any kind of outreach that does not involve either social media or e-blasts or the use of our website. As an example of how we use that, we have a theater festival going on this weekend that I have to run to after I'm done here, unfortunately. But it's going very well. We sold out last night, and we promoted this festival only using Facebook, Twitter, Google AdWords, which we have a grant for, and e-blasts. We use no other promotional means whatsoever, and the tickets have been selling like hotcakes. It doesn't work with every single program that every organization does, but we've managed to parlay, in part, the youth and diversity of our audience base, as well as the flexibility of digital marketing platforms and social media platforms to reach our audiences much more effectively, and to be able to analyze the results of our outreach in a very detailed and real-time sort of way.
That's great, thanks. So just kind of using that as a jump-off point, most of you actually spoke about how technology is changing the way in which you engage your audiences, but have any of you experienced the way technology is changing the landscape of the arts? Like, is it the way arts are presented and in, those type of manners, ways? Is it more about, for example, with the awards, is it, do you get a lot more digital entries, or is it way that you accept admissions is changing? And
something that's really interesting about the National Design Awards program is that our submission process is still a hard copy submission process. And every year we reevaluate this, and whether in today's digital world it's necessary to have hard copy digital submissions being mailed in. And every year at the end of each jury, the jurors are adamant about the importance of having that tactile, personal quality that is customizable when you're submitting something in hard copy format versus the sometimes standardized methods of digital submissions. So that's always surprises us. One thing about the awards program that has helped us grow is with the nomination process. We went from a closed nomination process with a closed nominating committee of members around the country that was in hard copy format, and we moved that into a digital submission process and much more open in order to broaden the appeal of the awards program, and that's helped us.
Yeah, go ahead. I was actually just going to ask you.
I mean, I'm a media producer, so I produce videos. Obviously, technology is really important for what I do. But I think one thing that's really incredible about the use of technology in the arts, especially today, is that you are able to reach so many people, and through video and our live webcasts, which are the quality of the production value is just so high, and you can literally be in the middle of nowhere as long as you have internet, and you can experience a live show from New York City. And in that sense, I mean, again, going back to not just Jazz at Lincoln Center being a business and a nonprofit arts organization, but as an advocate of the arts, it's like you want to broaden your audiences, and technology is the way to do it, because you don't have any limitations beyond the physical space, geography. You can go as wide as you want, and as long as you have the right content, it's just, I mean, the opportunities there are just like limitless. So for us, I mean, going back to what I said earlier, we're really investing in that right now. So yeah, technology is good.
I guess I have somewhat of a two-pronged answer. From an institutional perspective, the Whitney Museum is tremendously dedicated to living artists and really following them where they want to go. So really thinking about, as strategically and conscientiously as possible, what art tomorrow is going to look like. And with, again, our move downtown, part of what the mantle was that we wanted to assume was being as flexible as possible in the space that we could provide to artists, and hoping to create as much of a blank canvas, not just for traditional artists who hang paintings on a wall or sculptors who put pieces in the middle of a room, but giving them the most potential to work in ways that we might not even imagine. This can absolutely include technology, artists who are working between mediums, across mediums, in specifically technological mediums. The Breuer building that we're currently in on Madison Avenue is fantastic in a lot of different ways. What's not necessarily the most fantastic at, because it was built in 1966, is that technology and wireless doesn't work the best there. So being able to start from scratch, literally from the ground up, and create a new facility for 21st century American artists, we've been able to build in a lot more capacity for technology, for, you know, we hope to have huge media installation, multimedia installations that use the building as an art object itself, be able to project upon its walls, all sorts of things that, you know, I'm not an artist, I'm not going to be pushing the bounds of it probably, but we want to, we've worked very hard to make it as responsive to things that we can't even imagine as possible. From a narrow perspective, back in the development world, technology is increasingly shifting the way that the museum interacts with foundations and the government. Everything's moving online. That's sometimes a great thing. That's sometimes a little bit of a struggle as people figure out how to work with us how to work with them. Do all arts organizations look the same? Of course they don't. So what does that mean to application processes, reporting processes? It's not the most interesting thing in the world to talk about to you guys, but it is a day-to-day aspect of my life, definitely. And I'm happy to get into it more later if people are interested in it.
Well, I think it's interesting that you bring up the sort of the infrastructure ramifications of technology and how factors such as the building that an organization is in, or the Wi-Fi or the wiring that it has, can affect how well it can harness technology. I think that at least we found at the Café, because we are a relatively small organization, even though we work with an enormous number of artists, that we're able to harness a lot of the possibilities and potential that social media and other online resources offer. Because we are small, flexible, have a very small staff, we don't have to have many people sign off on most marketing decisions. In fact, you're basically looking at the marketing department right here. So there are advantages to that arrangement. There are also disadvantages, of course, because if the marketing department is also on stage, the marketing department can't post to Facebook at that time. Before working at the Nuyorican Poets Café, I worked for the 92nd Street Y for a number of years. And the Y is a tremendous organization and does some amazing things, but like any large organization, sometimes when the Y had a decision to make about a promotional strategy, or when a particular ad was about to be released, or even when a tweet was going to go out, the number of people who had to sign off on that decision was staggering. And the challenge, I think, for larger organizations that want to capitalize on all the capabilities that online media offers is how do you remain responsible and responsive to all the stakeholders in your organization while also harnessing the immediacy of the internet and realizing that and taking advantage of the fact that almost anyone you want to reach, if they are in fact using Facebook and Twitter, is making decisions in real time. And is going to make their decisions about which organizations to follow, which events to attend, and which purchasing, what they're going to purchase much more quickly than a large organization can sometimes come up with new material. But something else I wanted to mention is that another reason social media works so well for us is because we work with an enormous number of solo performers, small ensembles, and unincorporated groups that were not, before the advent of social media, so able to promote themselves to such a wide audience as now. But I think organizations that work with a lot of artists who are skilled at self-promotion really benefit from the flexibility of social media. We encourage all the poets and all the spoken word artists and all the solo theater artists we work with to create their own marketing platforms. We work with them on their own campaigns, but we find that the more solo artists we work with who themselves are well versed in social media, the easier it is for them and for our organization as a whole to build strong marketing campaigns. I think it's a little more challenging when an organization has one centralized voice for all of its outreach, especially if a lot of people have to sign off on that. But the more smaller producers of content that are involved in an organization's outreach, I think the more effective that outreach can be online.
Great, thanks. So Dan, you mentioned that you were the marketing department and you're sitting right here. Just like, and I'm sure as people who work in the arts are aware, you generally have to be spread across and you have to be able to cover a lot of skills. What are the key skills that you use for your current job, and how do you feel like they might change in the future of arts administration? Also, how do you continue to grow and learn? Like, are there sources that you guys use to improve the skills that you have now? And
okay, I'll go first.
We'll go this way.
I find that I have to pick up new skills every week, pretty much, and that's part of what I like about the job that I'm in. On the other hand, the job that I'm in involves a wide range of art forms and also a lot of artists who are relatively new to the field. That's a big part of our mission, working with artists who are just finding their voice, just developing their craft, as well as those who are more established. And as a result, we often have to improvise solutions to problems that we didn't know existed until an artist who is just trying something out for the first time makes it happen. For instance, one of the short plays in the festival we're doing right now involves a very microscopic reenactment of waterboarding, and we had never tried to have that happen on our stage before. But it's in the service of a very interesting piece, and we want to be able to make it happen. But I would say improvisation is probably the most useful skill that I've picked up. And that being said, everything that I learned in the Arts Admin program here at TC, even in the classes that I was very bored with at the time, has turned out to be incredibly useful. So I would say pay attention through both excitement and boredom while you're here, and take really good notes and keep those notes. Because I refer back to the notes I took in grad school at least once a month.
Oh, really? I was going to throw mine out as soon as I was done.
Don't.
Note to self.
I guess the biggest skill that I see using on a day-to-day basis, and it grows and shifts as we go forward, is relationship building, communication, listening. These are not surprising skills. These are not skills that you don't have already, but they're absolutely critical to work at a small organization, a large organization, anything in between. And part of that was actually teamwork, which was very much something that TC's program instilled in us and required of us, and was not something I necessarily had the most experience in, but has been part of every day. Again, I'm not sure that the skills I use are going to change significantly going forward. Again, that's to be seen by where funders go, but I don't think anything drastic is going to happen given technology or anything else. But also in terms of learning, I also similarly find I'm learning things on a weekly basis, on a daily basis at my organization, and that's the joy of having so many incredibly smart and talented people working in different areas at the Whitney. So the curators teach me things about arts that I didn't know already. I'm learning about arts education in a way that wasn't what I learned here, because it just wasn't what I chose to focus on. Budgeting, legal, all sorts of great things that again were introduced while I was in arts administration, but this takes it to a very different and specific level. And the other students in my arts administration class, including Eugenia sitting here, have been tremendous resources as well. And hearing about their day-to-day struggles and achievements has been a source of a lot of education as well.
I would say, like, focused adaptability is that a phrase? So it's like, I mean, similar to what Daniel was saying about improvisation, and I should really use that given that I'm in the jazz world, but it's really, I mean, you have to be able to adapt to your situation and situations and the different opportunities that come your way, and in an arts organization, that can come from so many different, like, you know, angles. So it's like trying to stay focused on what you're doing because you want to do that well, but also have the room to sort of move and shift and adapt to those, whatever situations come your way. So that's one, and then, which is always a struggle. And then the second one, I would say, just being open-minded. I think that sometimes we get stuck in a way of thinking based on either past practices institutionally or what you've done yourself personally. And also, we have a tendency to look at, in the arts, we have a tendency to look at maybe 2 or 3 organizations in the competitive landscape that you think you should always be following and looking at. But really, it's about broadening that. And just look, forget nonprofit, forget arts. I mean, look broadly and see who's doing what well. So it can be as, I mean, Fortune 500 companies, whatever they may be. I look at NPR all the time because their video content is incredible. And it's just a matter of just kind of, you know, get out of that tunnel vision and sort of look broadly, because it's not just about the arts, but like if somebody's doing something well, whether it's fundraising or marketing or whatever it may be, they're doing it well for a reason. And there's always a chance for you to learn something. So some of the things that I do is I look at the arts, of course, but I also look at other companies like NPR, like Narratively, or Yours Truly, or all these incredible video platforms. And it's not just about YouTube. You know, there's Vimeo, there are a ton of other platforms and people who are doing storytelling and content development so well. So for me, that's something that I'm continuing to try to focus on and to hone those skills and always sort of keep that in the back of my mind as I move forward.
I guess to add on what everyone has been saying already, one of the great skills that I think the arts administration program at TC taught me was the language of various departments and players in the field. In my role, one of the things I enjoy the most is that it is an interdisciplinary program, not only within the design field, because I'm constantly working with architects and graphic designers and fashion designers, but also within the arts administration field. I'm on a daily basis working with our marketing department, with our development department, with our curatorials. The National Design Awards program itself is located within the education department, so it sort of mends all these different areas together, which TC has been great at supporting. And
so you all, in your answers, talked about how you relate with other departments within your organizations. However, and it might not be the case for you, I've previously experienced a lot of siloedness within organizations where a marketing department might not necessarily talk to the fundraising department and messages don't go through. Have you had experiences such as that, and are there ways that your organizations are trying to improve the communication within the organization, not only like outside sources?
Well, one of the great things about our renovation project was it also allowed us to look at the design of our administrative office spaces, which were once closed offices. You know, no one's really interacting, no one's really speaking with one another, and allowed us the opportunity to turn our spaces into open offices. So to allow for that collaboration a little more easily. You know, you hear what someone else is talking about, you jump in if you have a comment or a suggestion. We have open office areas, open meeting areas, and we also have smaller closed spaces when those are necessary, but I think that's been a huge help for our organization. It's allowed for relationships on a personal level as well as on a professional level.
Yeah, I mean, we struggle with that. It's a challenge. We're a fairly large nonprofit, and working with other departments, as much as you may do it, you can't communicate everything all the time. So one way that we've sort of tackled this is we have a lot of cross-departmental meetings on a regular basis, whether they're bi-weekly or weekly, depending on what projects are coming up. And a good example is our gala that's coming up in a couple of weeks. So as opposed to, because it really isn't just about production or development, there's so many other departments that should be involved and at least be aware of what's going on. So even if it's as simple as setting up recurring meetings with key players from all departments, that can help tremendously. I know that our directors within the entire organization also meet regularly, so they are also in the loop. It's just about open communication, whether it's through meetings or through email, or our executive director, he implemented this weekly update email that goes out to all staff, and it's long, not gonna lie, but it's basically going through all the major departments and talking about the highlights for the last week and what's going on, the upcoming events, what we should focus on, things like that. And he sort of prioritizes for us and then disseminates that information in an email. And that seems like fairly simple, but it's just a matter of somebody prioritizing that communication the way it happens and just doing it. So it's helped. Work in progress.
Yes, as Eugenia mentioned, at a large organization, it is very easy to sort of settle into silos and not to communicate as much as we should, and it's really important and on everybody's mind not to do that. The New Building Project has been a really great rallying cry almost for exactly the opposite of that to happen, for everybody to work together. And part of the strategic planning process in preparation for the new building was actually to create better internal communication systems, part of which has already been implemented, part of which took place naturally with the strategic planning groups that were established to fulfill that strategic plan. And I think that has had a very positive effect. We're also currently literally in silos. There are different offices during the campaign, and it's not the most fun to have to run 10 blocks or a couple miles to see your colleagues who you really wish you'd see on a daily basis. But it's something that everybody understands and has done because it's important to us. And they actually recently implemented an upgraded intranet system for us, which has been a terrific tool for communicating about the new building, communicating about highlights that are going on at the museum, and everybody has an intranet of some sort, but it's been nice to see it grow and evolve and be taken on as a strong tool for that side of, and realizing that marketing internally and communicating internally is a priority.
Well, I think we have a smaller staff at the Nuyorican than probably at the other organizations represented here. But no matter how small the staff, you still can have miscommunications. You can still have priorities that seem to clash with each other. What we've found to be the most useful way around those issues, open communication is a big part of it, but also making sure that everyone understands how the tasks that they are being asked to undertake relate to the mission and the goal of the organization. And this is one advantage that I think our organizations have over a lot of for-profits. If even a for-profit that's run very efficiently, much of the time has the generating of profits as its underlying goal. And a nonprofit that has a mission that people can be rallied around, assuming that there is such a mission at the heart of all of our nonprofits, can do a lot to minimize miscommunication and diminish the likelihood of there being differences between the priorities of different departments. Not too long ago, we had an issue where some of the free after-school and literacy programs that we were doing were coming into a certain sort of conflict with some of the paid programs that we're doing and some of the rentals. And when I looked into why that was happening and talked to some of our event staff and some of our administrative staff, I found out that the staff who were working on the more revenue-generating programs didn't see the free programs as being related to the mission of the organization. So I invited the staff to sit in on some of those free programs and to talk with the teachers, and more importantly to talk with the students who were being served, some of whom had never before been to a poetry event, had never before seen artists who looked like and acted like themselves and had come from similar backgrounds on stage. And when some of our staff and curators had that experience, it became a lot easier for them to find reasons to value and prioritize these same programs. One related point, I was just at a conference at the University of Michigan a couple weeks ago. Maybe it was last week, I don't know. Time moves so quickly. And one study that was brought up at that conference, it was very interesting. It was a study that focused on the use of the word because. And in the study, there were a line of people waiting for a copier. And first, the people involved with the study tried to butt in line and just say, well, can I jump in line? I'm in a rush, I'm in a rush. And the people in line almost never let them in. Then when another group of people involved with the study tried the same thing, butting in line, but using the word because at the beginning of the reason why they wanted to butt in line, because I'm in a rush, because I need these copies quickly, almost always they were allowed to get in line without much challenge. Giving the justification for the task, giving the justification for the project, not just saying what has to happen, when it has to happen, and who it has to happen to, but why and what the payoff is for the organization or the constituents being served, I find is tremendously useful because it makes the people who are receiving that task and having to carry it out, it makes them feel more empowered, and it makes them feel like they are doing more to serve the other constituents of the organization.
Thanks. So Eugenia, maybe, I don't know if you could expand on what are the typical problems you face on a day-to-day basis in your role as in the brand and audience development department?
I think one issue that always comes up is, and I think this goes across the board for arts organizations in general, is trying to, when you're in audience development, the whole point is to develop audiences, right? However way, you got to do it. So the question is, how do you do that? And a lot of times it really is about finding ways to incorporate more mainstream or trendy or pop culture into your strategy. And that is not a topic people want to hear about all the time within an arts organization. So it's about trying to find a way to incorporate that without diluting or compromising your institution's voice and reputation. It's a very, very tricky balance. And that's something that we have content strategy meetings and we talk about ways to sort of implement that in small doses right now, which we're testing it out. And then we're looking at the metrics. We're looking at the, how well do these posts do, for example, on social media. Or, we did this, for example, we produced this one video around the Giants kickoff game or whatever in September at MetLife Stadium, where the Jazz at Lincoln Center Orchestra performed America the Beautiful. So this was a way for us to, okay, this is football season, our season is opening too, their season's opening, Jazz at Lincoln Center is performing America the Beautiful, it's a beautiful arrangement, let's do a video on it and see what happens. And it did well. But again, that you had to sell that to the people, to the executives and everything, because like, what the sports? Like, what are you talking about,
Do you get a lot of football players coming to see Jazz?
We do.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I don't know if any of you have been to Dizzy's, but we get quite a few celebrities and football players. Tiki Barber, is that one? Yeah. Him. I know he comes a lot, and I don't know, a few others. So it's like, that's always our biggest challenge in audience development. It's like, because you don't want to isolate your current audiences either, right? And so how do you do that? How do you not isolate your current fans, but then go after people by sort of using these other entry points? So we're working on it. The thing is, you just kind of have to look at the data that you have, whatever data you have, make a decision to try it out, and then look at it again and reevaluate your strategy. So, yeah, that's our biggest sort of issue right now.
So, Vasso, you I kind of manage the design awards and programming every year. How often do you have to change it up? It's important to keep the arts fresh. So, are there strategies that you use every year, or are there things that you do differently every year? You mentioned that you've used technology now to open the submissions process.
Yeah, and the National Design Awards is celebrating its 15th anniversary this year, so as you can imagine, we're constantly on a regular basis looking at the program to make sure it doesn't become stale, and fortunately enough, it hasn't. Over 15 years, we've looked at, adding new categories. A couple of years ago, we added an interaction design award category to reflect the growing field of design in general. Our programming, we're constantly looking at how we can incorporate the National Design Award winners into other programming aspects of the museum, into our teen programs, into our public programs, into our youth programs. And one of the ways we've been able to do this is through Teen Design Fair programs, where it allows an opportunity for National Design Award winners to meet with high school students in minute mentoring sessions and educate them about the field of design, which normally isn't a subject discussed in schools. We've hosted design talks with each of the award winners throughout the year to sort of extend that excitement of the award season.
That's great. Thanks. So, Morgan, I'm curious. I know that Whitney is going through this massive change, and the actual move is in May 2015. Is that right?
We're supposed to open in spring of 2015.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So how does this affect your job? As in, like, does fundraising change? Does your relationship with the government and like state and local governments change in this way? Or
Definitely. As everyone could imagine, there's a huge capital campaign on top of everything else that you have to do, and we've been open and will be open for almost all of the campaigns. So there's additional staff who have been added who are campaign specific, but truly everybody has had to pitch in, and there's ongoing conversations among the staff and with staff and funders about the relationship between capital campaign support and operating support, which we're always in need of, and will be when we transition this coming year. So my job looks different from if we weren't in the campaign. It will look different on a fulfillment side once we have moved and we're hopefully have met our goal, which we will. And that's been, I mean, it's great because it has encouraged, by virtue of necessity, everybody to work together more closely. There's meetings for the campaign specifically, of course, that again are more cross-departmental. We've been able to surface a lot more prospects and engage them around the building. There's really, I mean, everybody knows that bricks and mortar are very, very popular with certain funders. Not everybody. There are certainly organizations and individuals who are not interested in supporting bricks and mortar. But being able to take people on hard hat tours is a terrific tool, and it's great to have to go down to the site. I probably get there about twice a month right now, which is tremendous, and the rapidity with which it changes is shocking. But yeah, so it's a different picture, it's a different time, and it's been nice to see everybody sort of branching out in what they're interested in. I learned about flood mitigation. I knew nothing about flood mitigation.
Oh, I heard about how they've like have a US, they went to the government to try and get the same materials they use in submarines to make sure that like all the work is protected.
Yeah, no, there's a submarine door. You're going for it. But yes, so that and in terms of government support, we had a really, really wonderful relationship with the Bloomberg administration. It's been interesting to see that shift with de Blasio. You know, we're terrifically excited about the incoming Commissioner of Department of Cultural Affairs, but it's a new relationship. I mean, people know him, but not in this capacity. So it's going to be quite interesting to see how that develops, and we're trying to reach out and engage him, and it'll be a lot easier to reach the commissioner when there is one, and of course the mayor when he's staffed up fully. But we understand that things that happened previously and laurels that we had to the previous mayor may not be the same with this one. And so figuring out what that means for the organization, it doesn't change any of our funding, but it certainly affects how we engage them. And similarly with the change in city council members, it's a huge amount of time in my department specifically that goes into engaging them. And we have a new Christine Quinn's district, it's now Corey Johnson's district, and so what that means to us as well has changed. And if she had been mayor, it would have looked different again. So that's been really an interesting year on that front. And we're excited to work with the people in play now.
So Dan, the cafe has gone through an expansion. What was the motivation for the expansion, and kind of how did you fund it? And what were the biggest challenges you faced during that?
Let's see, where to begin? Well, when I started 6 years ago, one of the major projects that I was tasked with was raising enough money to renovate the building that we're in. And the building is a former tenement. It's over 100 years old. We've been in it since 1981, when we bought it for a whopping $7,800 from La Mama, which, and believe it or not, even that transaction was nearly didn't happen because the city of New York at the time, very different administration, had rules and regulations that made it challenging for nonprofits to sell property from one to another. But in any case, we ended up with the property, and we currently use the main floor as a performance space, the basement for offices and dressing rooms, things like that, and then we have a balcony. And above that are three floors that have remained more or less empty from 1981 until currently, because the funds didn't exist to do anything with them. So over the last 6 years, I spent a lot of time getting to know local politics and understanding how the city handles capital campaigns, and understanding what our representatives would and wouldn't fund, and building relationships and going to lots of fundraisers and shaking lots of hands, and also perfecting the process of writing grants and understanding exactly what it was that the city was looking for and what it would throw out in a grant request. So over that time, we managed to raise enough money from city sources to renovate the building. We currently have a $6.3 million grant to renovate our building. But because the city capital process moves at a slow pace, like many other city processes do, I can't tell you exactly when the construction is going to take place, because we don't know for sure. We do know that it's going to happen sometime soon. Actually, one of the interesting challenges that we face is that the building is continuing to age and continuing to need repairs. And since we don't know at what point the city is going to take care of those items, it's an ongoing question. Do we do a quick fix on our own? Do we renovate the roof? Do we fix the plumbing every so often when we need to, or do we wait for the city to handle all of it? It's also interesting because we know we're going to have to, at some point, relocate, not permanently, but temporarily, while an elevator and additional floors are installed. And gearing everyone up for that is a bit challenging because we don't have a timeline yet. On the other hand, it's a tremendous rallying cry, the fact that we have managed to raise this money, the fact that this project has become a priority for the city, and the fact that our constituents can look forward to having more than twice as much performance space, additional classroom space. Our education programs have been growing faster than any other programs that we have, and that's one of the reasons also that we need the expanded space to be able to accommodate all of that. So it's exciting to see what we're going to have in the future. It's just, as you alluded to, figuring out where the city is at any particular time with regards to projects that may have been started long ago is always an interesting question.
Well, thank you. We have about 13 minutes left, so we're now going to open questions out to the crowd to see if anyone out there wants to ask any of our panelists any questions. Hands up. Yay! Over there.
At the beginning of the session, there's a lot of talk about social media and digital platforms. Do you find for some of your institutions are more youthful by nature, and some have kind of a more old guard audience? Do you find that any of your newer marketing are alienating to the online? Does that ever come up? Do people seem to be resistant to engage with that?
I mean, yes. I mean, that's always like what I said earlier about striking that balance of, I mean, you can have multiple audiences. You just have to find out what the best way to talk to them is, right? So if you're using social media, yes, we're probably, it's funny, for us actually, our demographic on, our fan base on our social media channels are pretty comparable to, our ticket buyers and everything else, which is surprising because you would think they would be younger or whatever it may be. But it's always an interesting question, because I think what you need to do is really think about, you have your general audience who are doing this, X. they're going to shows, they're buying tickets for this show or whatever. But then you also have to think about, like, there are other types of audiences, and you just have to... Oh.
Sorry.
I think you just have to, I mean, you run the risk of alienating someone, but you also can't please everyone all the time. So it's about just identifying who you're talking to and finding the right way to talk to them. So if you're talking to someone on Twitter, you're probably, I mean, our board members are on Twitter, but they have like 3 followers. So like you're probably, you don't want to tweet for them, but you have a wider audience who is tweeting. And you have, we have like a ton of fans in Sydney, Australia, and Tokyo on our YouTube. Yeah, so like the video platform for YouTube, we're speaking to a different audience than we are on Facebook. And even within Facebook, you're geo-targeting based on what the message is, right? So it's just, you kind of have to segment it better and then find the right content strategy around that, marketing, content distribution.
I feel like Facebook also gives you, Facebook is our main platform, although we of course use other digital resources as well. I feel like Facebook gives you more of an ability to track the audience that is following you, or to figure out which segments, which demographics are following you. There's incredible metrics that allow you to get a sense of the average age, the balance of male versus female followers, and as well fans separated by language spoken and country of origin. Interestingly enough, we have a lot of fans in Manhattan, in Brooklyn, in Queens, in the Bronx, and then I think the next largest area that our fans come from is Chicago, and then at some point it's France, and then all the way down on the list is Staten Island. So, and oddly enough, that does mirror the results that we found informally, and also by doing surveys in our venue as well. But the other thing is, I don't think that social media any longer is the province of the young. I think that there are people of all ages who choose to opt out of social media, but I think that there are an enormous number of people of all ages who choose to use it, and we find that in many cases our most responsive social media fans are older. They may be retired, they may be people who, in many cases we find that some of our younger fans actually have gravitated away from Facebook specifically, and are more likely to try out newer social media platforms. But just in terms of measurability, flexibility, and dynamism, I think it's hard to beat Facebook and Twitter for their ability to reach a segmented and diverse audience.
I'll go for this side, yes.
So I've spoken with Eugenia about this. So
Hi, Meg.
Hi. I used to intern at Jazz Lincoln Center, so slight familiarity there. But this is sort of a question for everybody. I'm curious how in these communications, either on social media or in any sort of online platform, does the institutional voice come naturally? Do you have to decide it? And then is it something that you feel like you have to control or keep in check? Or is it sort of a natural progression that isn't really an issue? This is a question I've been wondering about. I talked to Eugenia about it just this week, I think.
You want to hear it again?
For the crowd.
I think it's, for us, we do focus a lot of attention on what that voice is, and we do really think about it. We strategically think about what and how to sort of speak to our audiences. But it's not across all social media channels. Like, we have specific, like, there's a general one for our biggest fan base, which is typically Facebook. But then there are different takes on that voice depending on the channel. So like Instagram will have, we're not using the same kind of photos. We're not using, we're speaking to our audiences more sort of like giving them backstage, exclusive sort of behind the scenes content. And that's something that really speaks to Instagram audiences versus Facebook, where, we tend to be more formal. We tend to be a little more cautious. We can never use certain words like cat, jazz cats, that kind of thing. Like, we do think about how we're portraying ourselves. Sorry? It's just an example of a decision that was made. It's just, because there's certain terms that I think you have to be careful about in various art forms. It's just like the terminology and the jargon you use, it can alienate, and it's not necessarily ubiquitous. So we are very careful on certain platforms, but at the same time, you know, you want to be colloquial as well. So for us, it's really platform specific. And I mean, it's hard because, and I think it's important to sort of not think of social media as social media, but rather think about the channels you're using, and also think about, you know, you don't have to use all the channels. There's so many. I mean, do you really need a Pinterest account? Like, this is something that we've been talking about. I'm like, maybe, but, you know, maybe Tumblr is better, you know, or whatever. There's so many out there, and it's really about picking and choosing and making sure that you're consistent in your voice. You don't want to be, that's the most important thing. So like, based on the platform, based on the channel, you just want to be able to be genuine. You don't want to sound like a robot, but I think it varies, if that makes sense.
From a museum perspective, I think there's actually a visual tone that the Whitney, I believe, tries to strike, both in terms of the social media it uses and in terms of literally every object we produce. So, for example, we only just joined Instagram, I think, right when the Whitney Biennial this year opened, and I think that's precisely because there wasn't certainty within the marketing department and across the museum about what the Whitney Museum's Instagram would be, and what tone it should have, and what visual identity it would have. We actually, last spring, went through an entire rebranding process, and so getting everybody on board, visual rebrand, identity, not institutional rebranding, I should be clear. And getting everybody on board with that was a very lengthy process, and the design department, our graphic design department, did a fantastic job with it, but it meant that you have to retrain everybody to, and all of the ongoing presentations, and we use a lot of PowerPoint decks in some of our fundraising material, so shifting all of that, making sure graphic design was on board with what we were sharing with the rest of the world, was a really lengthy process. And from a more technical, literally verbal perspective, we make sure that multiple sets of eyes within the department sees everything before it goes out the door, because it is absolutely essential that not only, you know, there aren't typos and things of that nature, but that it sounds like what the Whitney should sound like. So that's just par for the course for us.
So for us, we definitely have a consistent voice that has evolved over time, but it's very much evolved and continues to evolve in response to what we hear from our spectators, much more so than from stakeholders within the organization. And that's partly because our spectators, our fans online, are such a diverse group. But we will sometimes take risks with what we post because we want to get a response. Nothing that's going to hugely alienate people, but we will we'll post insider content on Facebook. We'll post very occasionally. We will, if something happens that we think needs to be brought to the attention of our spectators, even if it's not a wonderful thing, we will occasionally bring it up. One quick example I would use: a couple years ago, the New York Knicks, who had funded slam poetry programs for disadvantaged students for years, suddenly discontinued funding that program. And about a month later, Madison Square Garden took out a big subway ad that, I can't remember the exact wording, but it basically made fun of, it compared basketball players to poets, and said, I know what it was. It said, you can come to the East Village on Friday night, or you can come to Madison Square Garden and watch real artists slam. And then it had a picture of a basketball. So we called them out on Facebook, and we said, although we like to keep messages positive, you know, New York Knicks, what were you thinking? And then we posted pictures of that poster. So we got over 1,000 responses, and to tell you the truth, some of our fans went a little overboard, I think, in the extent to which they, less than 24 hours later, the Knicks took down all the posters, and yeah, and they apologized in public, and they resumed funding for most of the programs. So it's that kind of situation doesn't arise all the time, and I don't advocate picking fights, but when the fight comes to you.
So we have 2 minutes left, so if there's one quick question out there, I'm happy to.
Sorry, the influence of technology on the art itself. I read a fascinating article the other day about the way fashion is changing because of the need to please audiences on social media. So they're beginning to design clothes which are flat, they're frontal. And this is not a joke. I mean, this seriously has happened at a lot of, they're not looking at the three-dimensional aspect. Certain aspects of design and of manufacture are paid much less attention to because you can't really see them. You people also you have a curatorial role. So as you pointed out, you don't allow certain words to be used on certain certain media. That is going to affect the art that people are going to expose you to. I can think of ramifications. For instance, in the area of color, these color space for web design is sRGB, which is a very narrow color space compared to what's really available. Is that going to influence the art that is going to be presented? And on and on. I'm sure you all have heard of, if you consider teaching an art, we just heard about the fact that Twitter is being used to comment on what's going on in class, and some professors are having an assistant feedback into the teaching stream so that you're having real-time intercourse between the teacher and the audience at the time that the teaching stream is actually in effect. Anyway, just a thought. It's a lot of stuff.
It's very interesting to think about. Do you guys have any comments or?
I mean, I think there's a lot of artists today working with technology in various forms. Fashion is one of them. People are, connecting in interaction design with clothing that they wear. Interaction designers are doing this every day, through crowdfunding, there's crowdsourcing rather. It's endless. I think we're just seeing the very beginnings of it now.
I mean, it's an interesting question because we're really we're focused on building out this micro concert network that is based on our live webcasts, and with this idea of building audiences around the world who might not be able to come to our space. So it is like, I mean, and we're using obviously technology to broaden this experience. But I think for us, and we talk about this quite a bit because when using technology in this way, the live experience of seeing a show in a room with the artists and the musicians right in front of you is one type of experience, which has incredible value. And there's a very clear value proposition to that, in my opinion anyways. And as someone who works in the arts, it's something that, that experience is so important. And then you have on the other side of it, using technology to create this other kind of experience. Yes, we're showing you the same concert, but watching it in a bar or a library or from your couch even is vastly different. But it's about that, at least giving people a taste of it, at least making it accessible and using technology to do that. Because otherwise it would just not be there for so many people when you're thinking globally, when you're thinking really broadly. So for us, it's like we're using technology not to take away from the real experience of experiencing and watching a live musical performance, but we're just adding, it's almost like they sort of run on parallel sort of paths, but they have different value propositions. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think institutionally, it really depends on the institution and who you're working with and what that organization's mission is. For us, it will always be about the music first and our live performance based on, our artistic director and founder, Wynton Marsalis, and everything that he believes in as jazz as a democratic American art form. That will always be the baseline for it. And if anything, that using technology will always come as a result of that original goal and that mission and the programming that happens on our main stages. Because ultimately it comes down to that artistic integrity, and that will always be the baseline. And technology just kind of comes, it's a tool that we use to reach other audiences.